Welcome to season 3 of the Jeremy Mullins podcast. I am Jeremy, your host. I am here today with Mr. Tony Schmitt, one of our core sponsors slash partners of the Jeremy Mullins podcast. How's your day going?
Jeremy, it's great. Good to be back with you. Good seeing you, man.
Yeah, and today we're putting on our coaching hat and we're taking off our expert hat.
Very cool. I'm excited. Obviously, coaching is something I'm passionate about. Been doing it in my career, for, a decade and a half or so. However, backstory is I've been coaching for over 25 years in soccer and most recently wrestling, taken, a team to the national final, blessed with great athletes there, and teams that weren't of that caliber. So at the end of the day, coaching to the, understanding where your team is, whether it's work or something more athletic, it's super important. So I'm glad we're having this topic here.
Yeah, and I like the term, coaching, versus expert. And we've done this in our careers, right? And this is very common for a new trainer, a new dietitian, a new financial advisor, anyone that's new to their profession. They finished a course, they finished a degree, they finished some training, whatever it is, and their motivation slash thought process of what they know is very high. When you're new to something, okay, whatever the case may be. We see this in the diet world. Someone does a diet for the very first time, they lose weight, they think they know everything. And then what you realize is the more that you go along in your career, the more you realize there's a lot of stuff I don't know.
Oh, yeah. There's no doubt about it. Not only do you not know it, guess what? If I tell a good friend of mine that coaches wrestling, I said, if you're still doing the same drills that you did when you were wrestling, you're failing your athletes. Because are you telling me things haven't gotten better, whether it's a science, information, what have you? Of course they have. So no different that we have to continue to grow and evolve as coaches and leaders, and I guess just people in general.
100%. And we're going to tackle 3 things today. So the first one's going to be know your audience. Number 2 is identifying what your identity is as a person. And I think that's very key. And I'll kind of speak more of that from the wellness aspect. And then mindset, so the best plan in the world we know can work, but if we don't work on, this muscle that lives right here,
Biggest one. Yeah.
We've got to work on that. So let me just kind of paint the picture with know your audience. Okay. And this is something that I think is very important, especially for new coaches and coaches coming in the world, especially if they're on social media, right? Or you're doing live lectures or you're having conversations. And I get it. Even for this podcast, we take clips of what we're talking about. And then this clip goes into social media and there's no backstory. Someone doesn't listen to the entire podcast. So it's just this glimpse. And I see that's where a lot of people make some mistakes. So when we are educating, you want to know your audience. You want to identify your audience so that your message is going to the people that you are directing it to. And, so the example I'll use in this for me, Tony, is like, if I say the statement, hey, everyone needs to be on a low carb diet inside of some education because lower carb diets help reverse insulin resistance. It can help us be in a calorie deficit to drop body fat. We don't need a lot of carbs. That statement can be 100% true. If we're talking to middle-aged individuals who are detrained, who are overweight, and who have some insulin resistance, because lower carb approach will work for them. But that same statement that I just made to 22, 23-year-old wrestlers that, are, in college or coming after college or high school is not a statement that would work for them. So we have to, as coaches and as leaders, be very careful in, okay, who are we speaking to? Let's identify that audience. So the audience that is listening to our message knows, okay, who are we talking to? And maybe if they're not that certain audience, they can be like, okay, yes, that is a fact. That information is true. It's not true for me in my current phase or my current goal or life that I'm in.
Yeah, Jeremy, I got a feeling when you were talking with Oklahoma State's wrestling team with David Taylor, right? Or when you were with Mizzou's wrestling team, you were not talking about eliminating carbs for some of those young men. However, when you and I were talking, when I got my blood work, and there were some issues there here a couple months ago now, and you eliminated carbs from a large chunk of my day-to-day life. Those were very, very different conversations. And I think, it goes with understanding your audience and just understanding where they're at in a journey, what their goals are, but also what their capabilities are as well. We want to get everybody punching maybe up 1 to 2 weight classes, but we can't ask them to go up and punch 10 weight classes. That's just setting them up to fail.
And I think this in your line would be important too, right? So maybe the risk of investments or what people are putting their investment money in when they're, late 20s, early 30s is going to be a different conversation than someone who's 55, 60 years old, depending on where you're parking that money.
Yeah, no doubt. I think in our world, for me, we have to keep an investor invested for a 10-year period. And on a risk adjusted basis, your return is going to be somewhat similar. Okay. I know everyone has the best secret sauce and the best investment strategy on the planet that no one's ever heard of or thought of. Time is your greatest ally. And if you can keep someone in for market cycles or for a full market cycle, they're going to win. And so, what some people might need individual stocks so they have the transparency of the individual names in there to follow to get that peace of mind. Other people might need something more packaged, like a mutual fund or an ETF, because if they see the individual stocks going up and down on a daily basis, CNBC is driving them crazy, they're going to blow up their portfolio, get in and get out and get in and get out, and they're going to fail. So understanding where that client is psychologically, what they need, is also a big determinant. So not only determining their risk level, but understanding their psychological and emotional needs as an investor.
100%. So kind of take home message with know your audience and identify your audience, as a coach is, be careful with those blanket statements, because a blanket statement, while it can be correct for a certain percentage or a certain subgroup, subculture of individuals, it's not going to be correct for 100% of the people. Right. And I think that's just something to be aware of as a coach. And it can bring out, once again, it can solve some problems in, some future clients or in your current clients, that you don't have to deal with if you're very good at kind of navigating that and being directly like, hey, who I'm speaking to today is the average, middle-aged gentleman that is the CEO of a company, not a 19, 20-year-old Division I collegiate wrestler, right? Two totally different nutrition goals, two totally different approaches that we need to take, from that aspect.
In my mind, I'm that athlete. My
Yeah.
body has a very, let's just say it has a very different opinion.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you now, because this moves to our next topic, knowing your identity, you can move from that you're no longer a collegiate wrestler, Tony, and you no longer did
Well, it's
that.
actually collegiate soccer player, but love wrestling. Love wrestling.
All right. So moving on to identity. And I think this is something that, as a coach, I really had to wrap my mind around, helping people understand and develop their identity. Right. And, the classic I say to this is, seeing people, get healthy, lose some weight, get faster, training for a marathon, right. Or training for an Ironman. And, they put in the work, they put in the time, they complete the training program, they finish the race. Then what happens is this rebound, right? Because they don't continue running. They don't continue swimming, biking, running, whatever the case, whatever they're training for. And the reason being is they weren't running because they identified themselves as a runner, or they identified themselves as a healthy person that runs for the benefits. They identified or had an identity that I'm just training. So we could argue there was not an identity. They were just doing a training program for a goal of finishing a marathon or finishing Ironman.
Yeah.
And one thing I try to do is as people go along these wellness journeys is help them kind of develop that identity of like, and our off the book conversation earlier today when we were talking about like, you were saying, hey, I'm not even like timing my runs. I'm just going out and running. I don't know how far I run. I don't know how, until I'm done. I don't know the time. And I think that's so cool because now, you're using your running as a tool, and I need to be physically active because it helps me mentally, physically, and emotionally. Versus 3 years ago when you were training for the marathon, I feel like we were just doing the training for the marathon and not running for these other benefits.
Yeah, no doubt. And when I, was it 3 years ago or so when I trained for the marathon, it started out just I need to get my stuff in order in life and started that journey through 75 hard, and all of a sudden I started finding a love for an enjoyment of running again that I had when I was in my 30s running halves on a regular basis, but that had been hell damn near a decade. And so um as I restarted 75 hard again, I had an objective, okay, but it was like I'm just going to follow a program. And you mentioned it. I wasn't going to run a distance. I started off, I was just walking and rucking, building some muscle and getting some miles on my legs. And then it was, let's walk 5 minutes and run 5 minutes. No time, not obsessing with my pace. I got to be at 8:30, 9 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. I'm just going to go five at a pace that feels comfortable. Then I was walk five, run 10, walk five, run 15. And finally at the walk five, run 15, I'm like, I wonder what my pace is. Hell, I have no idea. Clocked it, was pretty good, was for me, was happy. Um, and then it's progressing from there. But I've set a little bit different running milestone out for this summer. And if I progress to a marathon, great. But I am excited about that other event because it is more mental
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. And, like I was this, right? I look back at my career of like training for powerlifting competitions, CrossFit competitions, or, triathlons, bike races, like you name it. And kind of, I started out, competition in college, was mountain bike Xterra races. I think they're still around. So it was like, mountain bike, trail run, and a swim. So those were the events, like, and I look back at now, it's easier to look back and be like, man, I was always in good shape and conditioning when I was training for events. But when there wasn't anything going on, that's when my health and wellness would slip. And it was because I wasn't doing it because I identified myself as a healthy person, right? I was doing it because it was a means to an end to be in shape. And now with really, and we've talked about this on past podcasts, like, my goal, your goal, our goal as collective, partnerships in our Green Up Wellness series in the podcast together, it's to help people be healthy
Yeah.
and have the capability to live life when they retire, 65, 70, 75 years old. And for me, that's my identity now. So I train for the 65-year-old version of myself. Yes, there's short-term goals along the way. This year I've got Leadville on the books, but like just because Leadville rolls around, I'll still do some stuff afterwards because I'm training, for, I mean, literally what's behind me to live in those mountains and have a good time when I'm 65.
And it's really about integrating. And my business partner Alex and I, we talk about this all the time with financial advisors and wealth advisors. So ones that are wildly successful are the ones that their life as an advisor for their clients, their role as a wife or a husband, a father if they have children. When all of that melds into this new one being, that's when they just take off versus, okay, I have this hat on for now. No, let me take it off. I have this hat on. I feel like you probably aren't being fulfilled because when you're taking a hat off, you're leaving that behind and you're getting fulfillment from each one of those things. And so, to your point, I think when we integrate our fitness into just who we are, is I'm going to be someone that stays in good shape and eats well, and doesn't rely on alcohol or too much caffeine and things like that. When we integrate into that, that is when we're going to find complete fulfillment as well.
I love the analogy too of the different hats, right? Like, hey, you need to have those on at the same time, and here's literally hats. Like, look at this, just setting here. I could say, okay, hey, this gives me, fulfillment, like being a coach to kids in mountain biking. Like, that's awesome. But I don't need to just put this hat on, right? There's more to me than that, right? I serve, this country, right? So I could put this hat on. I could sit and say, okay, hey, but like meshing them together is you can have all of that, so I love that analogy. Now, that slides us over to the last part, and I think this is so important, especially when young coaches and coaches really move. And I say young, not necessarily in age. young and inexperienced. When you
Mhm.
move from being the expert to being a coach, right? And the expert is like, it's a combination. I'm not saying that you don't need to know your stuff,
Yeah.
right? I think we should be continuous learners, always learning, right? But you don't want to just be a master at something and give directions. You want to be able to coach that. And the mindset, I think, is a big part of it, and whether that's building habits, whether that is, realizing that a lot of times in life, it's the harder path that we need to go down, right? And you can train yourself to be a little bit more resilient by doing hard things. I think a lot of that is overlooked. Especially, I know you're in your wellness journey, you're having great success with that, Tony. But I would say you see that a lot too with clientele, as far as like the mindset goes.
Yeah, and again, it's that which gets written gets done. If I look at historically clients that engage in a true financial planning process and have a written, documented financial plan, they're going to have probably more success and a more peaceful journey along the way because the plan is taking into account downturns in the markets, uh, wars, interest rate, ups and downs. And so that documented plan that has back tested information from thousands of probabilities through Monte Carlo simulation, people are going to find a more peaceful journey and more success in that. And I think that's where we as people, we as leaders have to continue refining and getting better on a regular basis. And if we were still sitting here as a firm with the tools and resources from 20 years ago, investment strategies from 20 years ago, doesn't mean you abandon them and you abandon the principles, but evolution is important and it's happening in every industry. And we have to be willing to evolve as people and also evolve, just evolve as a community as well.
Yeah. And I think especially, and this is not like look at me walk both uphill both ways, in the snow, but like compared to, our grandparents and their great grandparents and the things that they had to go through on a daily basis
Yeah.
and struggles from a resilience standpoint. I think life has gotten, so much easier that sometimes we are struggling to deal with hard things. And I think working on your mindset and going out and doing things that are physically hard. And that's going to be different for every single person. Like what your hard is different from mine or from someone else, right? I mean, hard may be getting up and reading in the morning. For some people, that might be hard to do. And
Yeah.
training yourself and developing that discipline, I think that a lot of that comes in the mindset, that can help you, fulfill not only your journey, when it comes to wellness journey, but also a financial journey.
There's no doubt about it. And just to stay on that point for a second, when it's physically hard to get up and start reading, right? It's not hard to actually read. It's physically hard to get out and go walk or run or go move weight or whatever those things are. But I believe a lot of that is because we are training our body. Our body is just a function of what our mind is telling it to do. And we were talking about this earlier that I think if we're feeding our brain the right stuff along the way, it's going to help us on the physical side. So it's important to make sure, in the spirit of evolution, that we're evolving our mind with the right things. Um, and I'm just a big believer in not only the reading, but making sure you have the right podcast in your ears, because what we are feeding our mind is really going to flow through to every other aspect of our life.
Yeah. What are you reading on a daily basis? I love that. Awesome, man. As always, I always think it's a great conversation. I wanted to go a little bit more today, kind of hit both, the individual, right? That's always the goal, is just for to educate and someone to take a good nugget, away from here and improve their life. But also like, I feel like I'm being called to, help, coach the coach, in a lot of the things I'm doing right now in my career. So I'm going to, try to knock out a few of these podcasts that are really, okay, what's the why behind it, right? Like, what are we trying to do from it? And I think it can help as an individual because, a lot of our listeners have been clients for 4, 5, 6, 10 years now. And I think sometimes hearing the why behind things, it's like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And everyone has to understand just because you don't have, a cap and a whistle and a clipboard doesn't mean you're not a coach. Everybody in some aspect of life is a coach. You are coaching someone in some way, even if it's just how you are modeling and living your life, right? You are setting a standard that other people are watching without even knowing, which is ultimately helping coach them as well. So you don't have to have a whistle or a clipboard. And also, conversely, just because you have a whistle and a clipboard does not make you a coach either, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what you said. You have to have a level of expertise, but then you have to take coaching, understanding it's not about you as a coach. It is about the person that is receiving the coaching.
Yep. It's a partnership, 100%. And you say coach, I'm dating myself here, but coach with a clipboard and a whistle. I think of the coaches back in the day with the shorty shorts that were pulled up, basically
Oh,
over.
yeah, the bike shorts, socks up. Yes. And yes, you're dating yourself. And
So I
you
know
know,
this, all the young kids, you got the coaches that, they got the Jordans on and they got, suit and tie and it looks all cool. Depending on the era you come from is what you visualize as that
no
coach.
doubt about it. No doubt about it.
Listeners, I appreciate you guys and gals. I hope you have a wonderful day. And until next time on the Jeremy Mullins podcast, have a good day.
Thanks, everybody.